I asked my students in my creative writing class on their last day, "Who are you?" Charles wrote, "I am a loving father." Charvis wrote, "I came from a great family, even though I was raised in the hood. I still have goals I want to accomplish in life, like owning my own business and receiving a 4-year degree." Ernest wrote, "I take pride in building things. I'm a good carpenter." James wrote, "I'm a guy who remembers what it's like to be a father. I'm still the guy who wants to be a knight when I grow up. I'm an OCD-addled wreck with a good poker face and a lot of discipline. I am awesome." Marty wrote, "I am a man with talents and abilities that I am tired of wasting." And Marshall wrote, "I am a man that has finally learned what life is really about, learning and helping others," with a big fat smiley face drawn right next to it. So we have a father, an aspiring businessman, a carpenter, an awesome knight, a talented man, and a work in progress. Most people look at these guys and just see criminals in bright orange jumpsuits, but I look at them and I see students and I see friends. I never thought that I would find myself anywhere in the narrative of prison education. Not as an educator, and definitely not as a criminal. But my decision to help teach at Perry came down to 2 key things. The first, I love creative writing. And the second was my writing professor, Dr. Morris, who talked to us students all the time about how much she loved teaching at Perry Correctional Institution, an all-male level 3 max, which means that 80% of the guys are in there for life. And her passion for it was infectious. I wanted it too. And so I badgered her for the rest of the semester to let me help her teach. And the more I badgered, the more it resonated with my soul that this was something that I needed to do. And once she agreed, we only then had to convince my parents. Easier said than done. When I first asked them if I could teach creative writing at prison, they laughed, and honestly, who wouldn't? Here I am, an awkward 21-year-old female college student bebopping up to an all-male prison, ready to explain how to write complex narratives and characters to 12 guys who may or may not be convicted murderers. And while they had many reasons for me not to go, my favorite one came from my mom, who said, "Well, what if you get in there and one of the guys convinces you he's innocent and then he manipulates you into falling in love with him, and then when you try and break him out of prison, you end up getting arrested yourself?" And all I could say was, "Oh, I really must be desperate if my only option is a prison boyfriend." And while this is a funny reason, my parents did have legitimate fears that I would be manipulated and attacked because these guys are criminals. But we as a society have been conditioned to believe that incarcerated people are just evil creatures who wear the faces of humans, and that they lack anything remotely reconcilable or redeemable. But I wanted to know for myself that there was someone who existed behind the label. There are 330 million Americans. Of those, 2.3 million are in a carceral setting. And you can look at this number and say, that's kind of small in comparison. But we have been trained to forget and ignore the existence of incarcerated people, especially for places like Perry, where 80% of the guys will never be free again. For a while, I operated under this idea that the lack of prison education was due to economic issues. But the US government provides scholarships called Pell Grants to people who cannot afford an education, and this used to be extended to people in prisons as well. But in 1994, there was a law passed that removed Pell Grants for incarcerated people. The Pell program cost $6.3 billion. Only $35 million went to people in prison. So it's an issue of ethics. It's a question of who is deserving of an education. It was never about money, obviously. It's because that guy is a criminal. And if he's done something bad, chances are he's gonna do it again. Dr. Morris enforced this rule with me. Call people who are in prison incarcerated people, not criminals or prisoners. And it wasn't until I came face to face with the guys in my class that I realized that these last 2 words erase the fact that they are human. On my first day of class, a student named Tremaine came up to me. He was about 40, and he had the voice of a practice singer. And he asked me, "Did you want to come in here and teach us, or were you told to do it? And I was like, well, I told him the truth. I said, I came into prison because I love creative writing. And also I wanted to have an opportunity to meet you guys. And then he told me this. I just want you to know that you have nothing to be afraid of because you have chosen to come in here despite the fear and stigma that surrounds people like us. If anything happens, we will protect you. And it's true, I wasn't afraid, not then and never again, because these guys then became my friends. And there would be small moments where one of them would tell a joke, or one of them named Marshall would scold me for biting my nails, which is something my mom always gets on to me about. And there would be a little voice in the back of my head saying, hey, these guys are criminals. And I would acknowledge that. I would say, yes, but they are so much more, and they can be so much more. I can help with that. Because the point of prison is to be both rehabilitative and transformational. But the reality is starkly different. Prison is just a holding pen for incarcerated people who go into the gates and exchange their lives, their families, and their identities for a bright orange jumpsuit and a number. But the two most transformational forces in prison are education and mercy. But education is ineffective without mercy, because mercy is at its most empowering, transformative, and liberating when it is directed at those who are least deserving of it, which is why prison educators are so much more than just teachers. They act as a literal connection to the outside world. They serve as representatives on behalf of a world that is kind, that hasn't forgotten about incarcerated people, because they have already been weighed, measured, and judged, and now is the time for kindness and mercy. Because like us, they have been conditioned to believe that they aren't worth the space used to hold them. But education gives hope. Instead of stagnating in a prison cell, incarcerated students use their minds to produce work, because education provides goals and incentives for incarcerated people to achieve and accomplish. Every week in our class, Dr. Morris would give our guys a creative writing prompt, which would then allow them the time and the space to engage with their mental and creative faculties to produce work they can hold in their hands. And that's why creative writing especially is so important, because it's not textbooks and qualitative data that's repeated verbatim. It's self-exploration and illumination. It's the translation of the emotions of your inside onto a piece of paper for other people to read and understand. For example, the first few weeks of class, we had a student named Charles who wrote with passion about topics that he loved. But his writing always felt bland and stagnant, and we couldn't understand why. And finally, one day I walked up to him. I'm like, hey, Charles, it is obvious to see that you have a passion for these subjects, so where are you? And he was confused and asked me what I meant, and I said, creative writing is about convincing other people to love and care for the same things that you love and care about. And to do that, you write yourself. Where are you? And after that, he bloomed. Because creative writing is, first and foremost, for yourself. It's yourself bared to other people in the most vulnerable way possible. And we all experience this fear of vulnerability because it's granting pieces of ourselves to others who might misuse us and manipulate us. And this is especially true in prison, where vulnerability is terrifying because so much has already been taken away from them. They're already reduced to a fraction of human. But creative writing makes the loud and bold claim, I am here, this is my heart, this is who I am, and no one can take that away. Vulnerability is scary, yes, but it is brave and it is beautiful. I had a student named Ernest who wrote a story with the opening line, I was found guilty of beating a man to death on my 17th birthday. Ernest is 67, 50 years in prison, and he's one of the kindest men I've ever met. He wrote this poem called Tears.
As we go through life and its ups and downs, we really don't think about limits set. What if we are allowed only so many tears if every tear is counted and knocked off? Then when we reach our limit, we die. So if that is true, hopefully, divided into joy and sadness, my prayer is that for you, happiness gets them all.
Ernest has seen a pain and suffering that none of us will ever experience. 50 years in prison, and he decided to be kind and compassionate and to care for people. One of the most horrifying realities of prisons is that many are victims of childhood poverty and abuse, and these aren't choices. These are circumstances that lend to this idea that certain people end up in prison because they've never been told or allowed to be anything different. I came up with this idea of something called the camaraderie of a shared experience, and it started with a clementine. For my whole life, whenever I've split apart a clementine, I give pieces of it to the people around me. It's this small thing, but it's the camaraderie of a shared experience, because it's these small connections we make between people that lead to a connection that might not have been there previously. And so it can be something small, like a clementine, or a creative writing classroom, or sitting in a room for 3.5 hours listening to people lecture at you. Or it can look a little something like this. I had a student named Marty. He was in his 60s. And if I had to guess, he's probably been in prison between 25, 30 years. I don't know. I never asked him. But he asked me about my graduation plans one day, to which I said, being the quintessential college senior, "Oh, I don't really have plans. I'm much more of a spontaneous person because the thought of the entire world being opened up to me is terrifying." And he nodded and he goes, "I understand, because I see if I qualify for parole for the first time next week." And I start freaking out. I'm going, "Holy crap, Marty, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Congratulations." He nods again and he says, "The world has changed so much since I've been out in it. I'm afraid it's going to kill me." Because freedom becomes this fraught monster. If incarcerated people do have the chance to go back out into the world, they cannot acclimate back into the society designed to shun them and hate them. But education and mercy are so much more than just little things we do to make people feel comfortable. Education and mercy say you are more than the sum of your circumstances, whether chosen or thrust upon you. Mercy says you can be more, and education says here's how. And that is through people who go into prison and say, "I choose you over fear." And yes, parole looks a lot different than graduation. But Marty and I's futures are so much larger than our present realities. And we are both fearful and hopeful for them. And I know that he's praying for me just as much as I'm praying for him. It's the camaraderie of a shared experience. Because it's these connections we make between people that foster compassion that can then lay the foundations for transformation and change. I didn't go into Perry so I could slap something on my resume or to check off a box on my good deed list. I went to Perry because I love creative writing, and I believe in the power of the redemption of self. And it brought me to 12 guys I love and miss more and more every single day. I want to leave you all with a few things to ponder and take away. First, follow the Dr. Morris rule. It's incarcerated person, not criminal or prisoner. Acknowledge the human behind the label. Second, find opportunities to volunteer and donate. Furman has a fantastic organization called the Furman Prison Educational Partnership. Email them for more information. And I say this one specifically to Furman students. Furman is rolling out a program called the Study Behind Bars Inside Out program, which will take 12 students from Furman into a classroom at Perry so you can learn alongside 12 incarcerated students. You get to do what I did. You get to know who these guys are for who they are and not the choices that they made. And finally, be kind, be compassionate. Find opportunities to show mercy and do it, because mercy and kindness and compassion will always be more transformative than anything ever will. This talk is dedicated to the guys at Perry who taught me that an open heart and a helpful spirit will always bring more happiness than anything ever will. To my guys, Gerald and Tremaine, James, Richard, Rusty and Todd, Charles and Charvis, Marshall, David, Marty, and Ernest, I miss you all so much, and I'm praying for you always. I want to wrap up with one more poem that one of my students, Rusty, wrote.
Today is the day that my voice will be heard to prove that I am a man, not with violence, but with words. I will say what I mean, and I will not hold back. I will speak from the heart so that I may stay on track. I have had a lot to overcome, but I am on that road now. It wasn't easy at first, but when I look back, I must say, wow. I have become a man with a voice, not to be defined by my past, but solidified by choice.
Incarcerated people can't have the world as a whole. They get it in pieces given to them by others who decided that sharing was much better than keeping. Thank you.